The Imperium does not lose worlds suddenly. It loses them the way a body loses heat, slowly, cell by cell, degree by degree, and by the time anyone notices, the cold has already settled into the bones. Cadia did not fall in a single moment. It fell across 10,000 years of perfect loyalty, perfect discipline, perfect faith. It fell because it did exactly what it was designed to do, until the design itself became the weapon pointed at its heart. This is not a story about heroes. This is a story about a system that worked. Cadia was not a world. It was a function. For 10 millennia, it served as the anchor point for the largest standing military force in the Segmentum Obscurus. Every child born there was born into the Cadian military structure. Every building was a barracks or a bunker or a weapons depot. Every field grew rations. Every factory cast ammunition. The planet did not have citizens. It had personnel. The Imperium does not ask worlds to be things. It assigns them purposes and measures their output. Cadia's purpose was singular: hold the Cadian Gate. The only stable warp route from the Eye of Terror into Imperial space. The only doorway that mattered. And Cadia stood in that doorway with a lasgun in one hand and a prayer in the other, and it did not move. Not for 10,000 years. The system worked like this. Every generation, the population was assessed. The strongest were inducted into the shock troopers, Cadia's famed regiments, shipped across the galaxy to fight in wars they would never see the end of. The second strongest were assigned to the planetary defense forces, the ones who would stay and hold the pylons, the fortresses, the walls. The rest were assigned to logistics, manufacturing, food production, all the silent machinery that keeps an army breathing. No one questioned this. Questioning was inefficient, and efficiency was holy. Children learned to field strip a lasgun before they learned to read. They learned firing stances before they learned prayers. They learned that the Emperor protects, yes, but the Emperor also expects, and what he expects is that you will stand your ground until your bones turn to ash and your ash turns to dust and your dust is swept into the intake vents of a Lehman Russ tank to be repurposed as filtration material. This was not cruelty, this was doctrine. The doctrine had been refined over millennia, optimized, perfected. Every aspect of Cadian life existed to support the singular mission of holding the gate. Education was military training, recreation was combat drills, art was propaganda, music was marching cadences. Even prayer was structured around the litanies of battle, recited in formation, synchronized, efficient. The ecclesiarchy maintained temples on Cadia, of course. But the temples looked like bunkers. The preachers carried lasguns, the hymns were sung to the rhythm of artillery fire. Faith and warfare were not separate concepts. They were the same thing, viewed from different angles. This was by design, because Cadia existed at the edge of the Eye of Terror, where the warp pressed against reality like a hand against glass, where demonic incursions were not theoretical threats but statistical certainties, where corruption could take root in a moment of doubt, a flicker of heresy, a single unguarded thought. So doubt was trained out of the population. Heresy was identified and purged before it could manifest. Thoughts were guarded through discipline, through faith, through the constant, grinding repetition of approved doctrine. It was suffocating, it was necessary, and it worked. Cadia had weathered 13 Black Crusades. 13 times the forces of chaos had hurled themselves against the gate, and 13 times Cadia had held. Not because its people were braver than others, not because its generals were wiser, but because Cadia had turned its entire existence into a single immovable answer to a single repeated question. Can you break us? And for 10,000 years, the answer had been no. The Imperium looked at Cadia and saw proof that the system worked, that faith and discipline could hold back the darkness, that humanity could endure anything if properly organized, properly trained, properly used. And so the Imperium built more worlds like Cadia, fortress worlds, factory worlds, agri-worlds, each one assigned a function, each one measured by its output, each one expected to burn itself down to nothing in service of the greater whole. This was not cruelty. This was the only way humanity could survive. And Cadia was the jewel of that system, the proof of concept, the success story written in blood and faith across 10,000 years, until the 14th time. Her name was Marta Senna, and she was not important. She was a logistical liaison officer, 3rd grade, assigned to Partox, one of the smaller fortress cities on the northern continent. Her job was to coordinate supply transfers between the orbital defense platforms and the surface garrisons. Ammunition, medical supplies, ration packs, fuel cells, the kinds of things that wars are actually fought with, though no one writes songs about them. Marta was 41 years old. She had been born in Partox. She had been educated in its Scala Progenium. She had been assigned to logistics at age 16. After testing showed she had an aptitude for organization and a temperament suited to repetitive work. She had never questioned this assignment. She had never wanted anything else. She had never fired her sidearm outside of mandatory qualifications. She had never seen a heretic. She had never been off-world. She had spent her entire life moving data from one cogitator terminal to another, ensuring that the right crates went to the right bunkers at the right time. She was very good at her job. Her supervisor, a man named Corin, once told her that logistics was the backbone of the Imperial war machine. That generals might plan battles, but logisticians made them possible. That every bullet fired, every meal eaten, every wound treated, all of it depended on people like them, working quietly in offices no one ever visited. Marta had appreciated the sentiment, but she also knew it was not entirely true. Logistics was not the backbone. It was the foundation, the invisible substrate, the thing that no one thought about until it failed. And when it failed, everyone noticed very quickly. Her office was small, a desk, a cogitator terminal, 2 filing cabinets, and a wall-mounted Vox unit. She shared the space with 3 other liaison officers, but they worked different shifts. Most days, she was alone. She preferred it that way. The work was meditative, predictable. Every morning, she reviewed the supply manifests. Every afternoon, she cross-referenced them with the garrison requisitions. Every evening, she filed the discrepancy reports and scheduled the next day's transfers. It was not glamorous, it was not heroic, but it was necessary, and necessity was its own kind of virtue, which is why she noticed the discrepancy. It was small. A transport had arrived from the orbital station carrying 200,000 lasgun power packs. The manifest said 250,000. A clerical error, most likely. It happened. The Munitorum dealt in numbers so vast that rounding errors were inevitable. 50,000 power packs in the grand calculus of the Imperium's war machine was a rounding error. But Marta did not believe in rounding errors. She believed in precise accounting, in verifiable numbers, in systems that worked because someone somewhere was paying attention to the details. So she filed a requisition for the shortfall, standard procedure. It would be processed, approved, and fulfilled within the standard 6 to 8 week window. The system had protocols for this. The system always had protocols. 3 days later, her requisition was denied. Not delayed. Denied. The reason given: supplying depot has been reassigned to Segmentum Solar Defensive Operations. Requisition to be resubmitted through alternative channels. Marta read the message twice. Then she checked the depot's designation. It was a Munitorum supply hub in high anchor above Cadia. It had been there for 3,000 years. It didn't get reassigned. It was infrastructure. It was as permanent as the planet itself. She sent a query. The reply came back 6 hours later. Inquiry not recognized. Clarify command authority. She clarified. She included her personnel number, her clearance codes, her supervisor's authorization. The reply came back again. Supplying depot has been reassigned to Segmentum Solar Defensive Operations. Requisition to be resubmitted through alternative channels. Marta stared at her terminal. The same message, word for word. Not a response. An automatic loop. She printed the exchange and brought it to Corin. He read it slowly, his weathered face expressionless. Corin was 64 years old. He had been doing logistics since before Marta was born. He had seen 3 Black Crusades. He had coordinated supply lines through sieges that lasted years. He had learned long ago not to panic over anomalies. File it under operational delays, he said. Mark it non-critical. Move on. Non-critical? Marta said, we're short 50,000. We have reserves, Corin said. That's what reserves are for. But if the depot's been reassigned, then another depot will take its place, Corin said. His voice was not unkind, it was simply tired. The Munitorum does not forget Cadia, Seni. It never has. If there's a delay, there's a reason. Trust the system. Marta wanted to argue, but Corin was right. The system had worked for 10,000 years. It had survived the Gothic War, the Macharian Crusade, the Age of Apostasy, 13 Black Crusades. The system did not fail, so she marked it non-critical and moved on. But 3 weeks later, another shipment came up short, and another, and another. Each time, the response was the same. Depot reassigned. Resubmit through alternative channels. She resubmitted. The new requisitions were denied. Insufficient transport capacity. Request queued pending higher priority allocation. Requisition does not meet urgency threshold. The language was bureaucratic, unemotional. But the pattern was clear. Cadia was being deprioritized. Marta began tracking the discrepancies in a separate file. A private file, not part of the official records. She told herself it was just for her own reference, so she could identify patterns, so she could adjust her projections. But really she was doing it because she needed to see it, to confirm that she was not imagining things. The numbers did not lie. Over the course of 2 months, Khazar Partox's supply deliveries had dropped by 38%, and the decline was accelerating. She brought it to Corrin again. He looked at the data, he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than any enemy ever could. Resignation. "Keep doing your job, Senna," he said quietly. "That's all we can do." No one on Cadia knew what the pylons were. They had always been there. Vast black structures, older than the Imperium itself, scattered across the planet's surface like grave markers. Necron architecture, the Mechanicus said, though they did not elaborate. Xenos technology. Heretical to study too closely, sacred to destroy, useful to defend. The pylons had a function, even if no one understood it. They suppressed the warp. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in ways that could be measured. The pylons kept the Eye of Terror at bay. Warp travel near Cadia was stable. Psychers reported fewer disturbances. The veil between real space and the immaterium was thicker here, stronger, and that strength made Cadia's position possible. If the pylons failed, the gate would collapse into madness. The Mechanicus monitored them. Servitors patrolled their perimeters. Tech priests performed rituals of maintenance, not understanding, not repairing, but appeasing. Burning incense in the presence of alien machinery they could not replicate and dared not tamper with. They chanted the litany of ignition over structures that had no engines. They anointed circuitry that predated human civilization with sacred oils. They prayed to the Omnissiah for the continued function of machines built by a species that had no gods. And the pylons endured, because the Mechanicus, for all its faith in the machine god, understood one fundamental truth. Ignorance was not an excuse for failure. If you could not understand a machine, you maintained it anyway. You kept it clean, you kept it powered, you kept it working, even if you did not know how or why. This was not superstition. This was pragmatism dressed in religious language. And it worked, until the 14th Black Crusade began, and Abaddon the Despoiler did something no one had expected. He ignored them. For the first 3 months of the invasion, not a single Chaos Warband made a serious attempt on a pylon site. The initial assaults focused on the orbital defenses, the void stations, the fleet anchorages. It was logical. Establish space superiority first, cut off reinforcements, then grind down the surface. The Cadian command, led by Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed, adjusted their defensive posture accordingly. Reinforcements were pulled from pylon sites and redeployed to the void stations. The logic was sound. If the enemy was not attacking the pylons, those forces could be used elsewhere. This was the first mistake. Not a dramatic mistake, not an obvious one, just a small miscalculation. A reasonable decision based on incomplete information. But there were so many pylons, hundreds of them, scattered across every continent, they could not all be defended with equal strength. So the defense was prioritized, the largest pylons, the most active ones, the sites closest to major population centers. The rest were left with skeleton crews, automated turrets, servitor sentries, enough to deter raiders, not enough to hold off a siege. And Abaddon did not lay siege. He destroyed them from orbit, not quickly, not all at once, but methodically, one every few days, cycling through targets too dispersed and too numerous to intercept. Bombardment torpedoes punched through atmospheric shields and vaporized the structures in pulses of silent, efficient violence. Each time a pylon fell, the Mechanicus logged it, transmitted the data to Mars, requested guidance. Mars did not respond. Mars was very far away, and Mars was engaged in its own battles. The forges of the Red Planet did not have the luxury of focusing on a single theater. The entire Imperium was at war. Resources were finite. Priorities had to be established. Cadia was one priority among thousands. The Cadian command understood the danger, but could not halt it. You cannot defend every site when the tech priests monitoring the pylons began reporting anomalies, minor fluctuations in the local warp field, small tears in reality that appeared and disappeared within seconds, nothing that qualified as a demonic incursion, nothing that required immediate action, just instability. The data was forwarded up the chain of command, filed, analyzed, marked for further observation, and the war continued. Because the war always continued, Marta Sen was working late when the Vox went silent. Not dead, not static, just empty. She had been trying to reach the transit hub at Kasr Galen for 6 hours. A routine check-in, nothing urgent, but protocol required confirmation that the supply routes were still open. Galen was only 40 kilometers away, close enough that the Vox should have been effortless, but there was no response. She checked her equipment, cycled through frequencies, ran a diagnostic. Everything came back green. The Vox was working. The signal was transmitting. No one was answering. She reported it. Korn sent a runner. The runner came back 4 hours later and said the roads were blocked, debris, wreckage, possibly an artillery strike. He couldn't get through. What about Vox contact? Marta asked. Nothing, the runner said. He was young, 19, maybe 20. His uniform was covered in dust. I got within visual range. The Kasr it's still there, the walls are intact, but there's no activity, no lights, no patrols. Did you try to enter? No, ma'am, my orders were reconnaissance only. Marta nodded, looked at Korin. Korin reassigned the supply route through Kasr Myrak instead. Adjustments were made, schedules were updated, the system compensated. But 3 days later, Myrak stopped responding too. Then Partox itself began to feel it. The sky was wrong. It had been weeks since Marta had seen the sun clearly. The smoke from the void battles above had thickened the atmosphere into a permanent overcast, but this was different. The air had taken on a weight, a texture. When she stepped outside the Kasr's walls during her shift breaks, she could feel it pressing against her skin. Not wind, not heat, something else. Pressure. From the inside out, people were having dreams. No one talked about it, but everyone knew. You could see it in the way soldiers moved through the halls, the way they avoided eye contact, the way conversations stopped when you entered a room, the way groups formed in corners, speaking in low voices, then dispersed when officers approached. Marta had dreams too. She dreamed of a door that would not close. She dreamed of standing in her quarters, watching the door slowly swing open, and no matter how many times she shut it, it opened again. And through the gap she could see something vast and patient waiting on the other side. Not a daemon, not a monster, just presence. Something that existed in a way that was fundamentally wrong. Something that should not be but was anyway, and its existence bent reality around it like heat bends light. She woke from these dreams with her heart pounding, but she could never remember what she had seen through the door. Only the feeling, the knowledge that something was watching. Something was waiting. Something was coming closer. She did not tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. It was just a dream. But when she checked the medical logs, purely out of administrative curiosity, she found that 70% of Kasr Partox's population had reported sleep disturbances in the past 2 weeks. Requests for sedatives had tripled. 2 soldiers had been confined to the Medicae wing for behavioral instability, which was the Munitorum's term for screaming in the middle of your watch and refusing to explain why. The ecclesiarchy sent preachers into the barracks to lead prayers, long, exhausting sessions that lasted hours. The soldiers knelt on the cold stone floors and recited the litanies of protection, the litanies of faith, the litanies of the Emperor's grace. The prayers helped, not because they drove away whatever was causing the dreams, but because they gave people something to do, something to focus on, a structure to cling to when everything else felt like it was dissolving. The commissariat increased patrols, not because there was any evidence of heresy, but because morale was declining, and declining morale was a form of weakness, and weakness was an invitation. The commanders issued new standing orders. Anyone exhibiting signs of warp corruption was to be reported immediately and detained for assessment. But no one was corrupted. They were just tired and afraid, and no one could explain why. Marta requested an updated threat assessment from Planetary Command. She wanted to know if the warp presence was being monitored, if the Mechanicus had issued any warnings about the pylons, if there was an official explanation for what was happening. Her request was denied. The reason given: classified. Command clearance required. She did not have command clearance. She was a logistical liaison officer, 3rd grade. She moved crates. She filed reports. She was not supposed to ask questions about strategic intelligence. So she stopped asking. But the dreams did not stop, and the pressure did not stop. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Khazar Partox began to realize that something fundamental had changed. They were not just fighting an enemy. They were fighting reality itself. In the Imperium, faith and procedure are indistinguishable. You do not ask why you are ordered to hold a position. You hold it. You do not question why your regiment is being deployed into a meat grinder. You deploy. You do not wonder if the God Emperor can hear your prayers. You pray. This is not ignorance. This is survival. Because the moment you start asking why, the moment you start thinking about whether the orders make sense, whether the system is just, whether your sacrifice will matter, that is the moment doubt enters. And doubt is a doorway, and something is always waiting on the other side. Cadia's entire culture was built on this understanding. Every child learned the litany of resolve before they learned their own name. I am the wall against the darkness. I am the shield that does not break. I am the blade that does not dull. I stand where I am placed. I fight when I am called. I die when I am commanded. And in my death, humanity endures. It was beautiful in its way. Terrible, but beautiful, because it promised meaning. It promised that your life, no matter how small, no matter how brief, mattered in the grand calculation of humanity's survival. You were not an individual, you were a component. And components do not need to understand the machine to serve the machine. Every soldier could recite the Tactica Imperium's core doctrines by heart. Every officer had been trained to see war not as chaos, but as variables within acceptable parameters. Casualties were not tragedies, they were attrition rates. Defeats were not failures, they were tactical withdrawals. Death was not an end, it was resource expenditure. And when those parameters shifted, you did not panic, you adjusted. When supply lines collapsed, you rationed. When reinforcements failed to arrive, you consolidated. When the enemy overran a position, you triggered the demolition charges and fell back to the next line. You did not ask if you were going to win. You asked what you could hold, and for how long, and at what cost. And Cadia had been answering that question for 10,000 years. But the 14th Black Crusade was different. Not because the enemy was stronger, not because the defenders were weaker, but because the system itself was changing. The variables were shifting in ways that the Tactica Imperium had no doctrine for. Warp storms were appearing inside the Cadian Gate. Not outside it, not in the eye, inside, in real space. It started small. Navigators reported minor disturbances, astropaths complained of migraines, ships in transit experienced brief delays. Nothing critical, nothing that couldn't be explained as the natural turbulence of operating so close to the eye. But then a supply convoy vanished, not destroyed, vanished. 8 bulk transports carrying ammunition, medical supplies, and 3 full regiments of reinforcements. They entered the warp at the edge of the Cadian system. They never arrived. No distress signal, no debris, no warp signatures. They simply ceased to exist. The Navy launched search and rescue operations. They found nothing, not even wreckage. The ships had simply been erased. The Munitorum adjusted the logistics projections and rerouted supplies from other sectors. The Administratum filed the incident as a navigational failure and moved on. Because the Imperium does not stop for missing ships. It has lost entire battle fleets and continued the war. It has lost entire worlds and not broken stride. The system does not require perfection. It requires function. And Cadia was still functioning. Barely. The problem was not that supplies were being lost. The Imperium had protocols for that. Emergency caches, reserve stockpiles, contingency plans stacked on top of contingency plans. The problem was that the protocols assumed a certain baseline level of support. They assumed that losses would be replaced, that shortfalls would be addressed, that the system, while imperfect, would continue to flow. But the flow was stopping, and no one wanted to admit it, because admitting it meant admitting that the system was failing. And if the system was failing, then what were they fighting for? If the Imperium could not sustain Cadia, the jewel of the defensive network, the fortress that had held for 10 millennia, then what hope did any other world have? So no one admitted it. They adjusted, they rationed, they made do, and they continued operations, because that was the doctrine. Marta's requisitions were now being denied automatically. She had submitted 47 requests in the last month. 47. Power packs, medical supplies, fuel, rations, basic necessities, things that Khazar Partox needed not to win, but to continue. Every single request had been denied. The reasons varied. Supply depot reassigned, insufficient transport capacity, request queued pending higher priority allocation, requisition does not meet urgency threshold. She appealed, she escalated, she submitted emergency requests with Corran's authorization. They were all denied. She began to suspect that no one was actually reading her requests, that they were being filtered by some algorithmic process, sorted by priority codes she did not have, rejected before any human eyes ever saw them. The system was no longer evaluating her needs, it was simply denying them. "We're using the reserves," Corran said when she brought it to him again. He looked older now, grayer. His hands shook slightly when he signed the data slates. "That's what reserves are for." "We don't have reserves anymore," Marta said. Corran stared at his desk. "Then we'll make do." "With what?" He didn't answer. That night, Marta went down to the depot sublevel herself. She wanted to see it. She wanted to confirm what she already knew. The reserve stockpiles were nearly empty. The depot was vast. 5 sublevels carved into the bedrock beneath Khazar Partox. Rows and rows of storage cages, each one marked with a designation code and an inventory manifest. Automated servitors patrolled the aisles, scanning barcodes, updating records, moving crates from one location to another in accordance with retrieval algorithms no one fully understood. She walked past them slowly, checking the manifests against her data slate. Ammunition, down to 18% of baseline capacity. Medical supplies, 11%. Fuel cells, 6%. Rations, 4%. 4%. Khazar Partox had 12,000 personnel. If they were cut off from resupply, and they were cut off, she knew that now, they had enough food for 16 days. 16 days, and then they would start starving. She stood in the empty depot and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something deeper. The foundation she had built her entire life on. The belief that the system worked. That if you did your job, if you followed the protocols, if you remained faithful, the Imperium would sustain you. But the Imperium was not sustaining them. The Imperium was letting them starve. She reported it. Again, flagged it as critical. Again, used every authorization code she had access to. Again, the response came back within the hour. Resource allocation is a command-level decision. Continue operations per current directives. She stared at the message. Continue operations, as if the supplies would simply materialize, as if faith and discipline could fill an empty stomach. As if belief in the system was sufficient to sustain the system. She wanted to scream, she wanted to drag her superiors down to the depot and make them look at the cages, make them see the numbers, make them understand that the system was not working. But she did not, because she had been raised Cadian, and Cadians did not scream, they did not panic, they endured. So she returned to her terminal and she continued operations. And 16 days later, the rations ran out. Hunger is a slow wound. It does not kill quickly. It kills across weeks, across months. First, the body burns its fat, then it burns its muscle, then it begins to consume itself, organ by organ, cell by cell, and long before death, the mind begins to fail. Khazar Partox began rationing on day 17. Half rations for non-combat personnel, full rations for active duty soldiers, but only just. Medical staff were prioritized, command staff were prioritized. Everyone else received a ration bar every other day and a liter of recycled water. It was not enough. People began to weaken. Fatigue became universal. Soldiers stumbled during drills. Workers collapsed at their stations. The Medica wing filled with cases of malnutrition, dehydration, exhaustion, and still, no supplies arrived. The commissariat issued a decree. Any personnel caught hoarding food would be executed. 2 soldiers were shot in the first week. The executions were public. Mandatory attendance. The entire garrison assembled in the main courtyard and watched as the accused were brought forward. They were not given trials. They were not allowed to speak in their own defense. The evidence was presented, a cache of ration bars hidden in a footlocker, and the sentence was carried out immediately. The commissar delivered a speech afterward, about duty, about sacrifice, about the necessity of discipline in times of hardship. But Marta, standing in the crowd, only heard one thing: the system is eating itself. Because that was what was happening. The Imperium had stopped feeding them, so now they were consuming each other, executing their own people over scraps of food, turning soldiers into executioners, turning survival into a crime. Marta stopped eating, not intentionally, not as an act of protest or sacrifice. She simply forgot. She would sit at her terminal for 16 hours, processing requests that would never be fulfilled, tracking supplies that did not exist. And when her shift finally ended, she would stumble back to her quarters and collapse into sleep without thinking about food. She lost weight. Everyone did. Her uniform hung loose on her frame. Her hands looked skeletal when she typed. Her face became hollow, sharp. But she continued operations, because the system required it. Because if she stopped, if everyone stopped, then the Khazar would stop functioning. And if the Khazar stopped functioning, then Cadia would stop functioning. And if Cadia stopped functioning, then the gate would fall, and the Imperium would lose the war. And the Imperium could not lose. That was the one absolute, the one truth that could not be questioned. No matter how many people died, no matter how much they suffered, no matter how obvious it became that the system was failing, the Imperium could not lose. Because if the Imperium lost, humanity would be consumed, extinguished, erased from the galaxy. So they suffered. So they starved. So they died, because the alternative was unthinkable. And on day 31, the astropathic relay went silent. Not broken, not jammed, silent. Khazar Partox had been sending distress signals for weeks, requests for supply drops, requests for reinforcements, requests for acknowledgement. None had been answered, but the relay had still been transmitting. Marta had checked it herself multiple times. The signal was broadcasting into the warp, carried by the screams of the choir psychers stationed in the sub-level crypts. They were still alive, still functional, still sending. But now the relay had stopped. Marta went down to check on them. The crypt was cold. It always was. Psychers required cold environments. Something about regulating their core temperature, about keeping their minds from overheating during the strain of warp transmission. The tech priests had installed climate control units that kept the temperature just above freezing. But now it felt different. Heavier. The air tasted like copper and ash. The psychers were dead, all 6 of them, slumped in their restraint chairs, their heads hanging forward, their mouths open in silent screams. No wounds, no signs of violence, no blood, just empty. Their eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. No light, no awareness, just vacant holes where consciousness used to be. The tech priest in charge of the relay stood beside them, staring. His name was Vec 47. He had been maintaining the relay for 11 years. Marta had worked with him dozens of times, coordinating signal bandwidth for supply transmissions. "What happened?" Marta asked. Vec 47 did not look at her. His voice was flat, mechanical. "The warp is unstable. The choir could not maintain cohesion. They burned out. All of them? All of them." Simultaneously, within 17 seconds of each other, Marta felt cold. Colder than the crypt's refrigeration could account for. Can they be replaced? No. Why not? Because there are no replacements. Vec 47 finally turned to look at her. His augmetic eye clicked and whirred, trying to focus. The black ships stopped arriving 4 months ago. The black ships, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's prison vessels, which scoured the Imperium for psychers, which collected them, trained them, sorted them. The ones strong enough became astropaths. The ones too weak were fed to the Golden Throne. The black ships were the Imperium's circulatory system for psychic talent, and if they had stopped arriving, then the supply chain for psychers had collapsed, which meant every astropathic choir in the system was burning through irreplaceable personnel. Why? Marta asked. Why did they stop? I do not know. The black ships do not report to me. They report to Terra, and Terra does not respond to inquiries from fortress cities. Then how do we send messages? We do not. The words hung in the frozen air. Marta stared at the dead psychers, at their gray skin, their hollow eyes, their mouths frozen in screams no one had heard. "We're alone," she said quietly. Vec 47 did not answer. He did not need to. Khazar Partox had been built to withstand a siege. Its walls were 30 meters thick, reinforced with ceramite and adamantium, studded with weapon emplacements and void shield generators. Its gates could hold back a titan. Its bastions had overlapping fields of fire that could reduce an armored column to molten slag in minutes. It had been designed by the finest military architects in the Imperium. It had been blessed by the ecclesiarchy. It had stood for 2,000 years, and now it was crumbling. Not from enemy fire, from entropy. The void shields had failed 3 weeks ago. The generators had burned out, and there were no replacement parts. The tech priests had tried to repair them, but the machine spirits were unresponsive. They performed the rites, they burned the incense, they anointed the circuits with sacred oils. Nothing worked. The generators sat silent, dead, useless metal taking up space in the shield bunkers. The walls themselves were beginning to crack. Not visibly, not yet. But Marta could feel it when she placed her palm against the stone. A subtle vibration, a low hum that never stopped. As if the fortress itself was straining under a weight that had nothing to do with gravity. The pressure in the air had grown worse, thicker. Some soldiers refused to leave the interior halls. They said the sky was watching them, that if they stayed outside too long, something would notice. The commissariat called it cowardice and executed 3 men for refusing orders. But after that, no one else refused. They simply went outside, performed their duties, and came back inside as quickly as possible. Their faces were pale, their movements were quick, nervous. They looked over their shoulders constantly, though there was nothing to see. Just the gray sky, the dead air, the pressure that made breathing feel like drowning. Marta spent more and more time in the depot sublevel. It was quieter there, darker. The hum was fainter. She could almost pretend that the world outside was still functioning, that supply ships would arrive, that reinforcements were coming, that the Imperium had not forgotten them. But she knew the truth. They had not been forgotten. They had been deprioritized. Cadia was losing. Not just Khazar Partox, the entire planet. The entire system. She had pieced it together from fragments, overheard Vox transmissions, scraps of intelligence reports that had made their way down the chain of command before the astropaths died. Rumors whispered in the barracks when people thought no one was listening. The pylons were failing. The warp was encroaching. The enemy fleets had achieved void superiority. Entire Khazars had gone dark. Entire continents had been overrun. Lord Castellan Creed was dead. No one had confirmed it officially, but the command staff had stopped mentioning him, stopped referencing his strategies, stopped invoking his name in their orders. And when Cadia's greatest hero stops being mentioned, there is only one reason why. The Imperium was evacuating. Not everyone. The Imperium did not evacuate entire planets. That was not logistically possible. But high-value personnel, command staff, tech priests with irreplaceable knowledge, soldiers who could be redeployed to other fronts, assets that could still be useful, the rest would be left to hold. And when holding was no longer possible, they would be expected to die. This was not cruelty. This was doctrine. The Tactica Imperium was explicit about this. When a position becomes untenable, you hold it as long as possible to buy time for the larger strategic picture. You do not retreat unless ordered. You do not surrender. You simply hold and hold and hold until there is nothing left to hold with. And then you die. And the Imperium logs your sacrifice and moves on. This was how humanity survived, not through heroism, not through virtue, but through the ruthless mechanical efficiency of a system that understood one fundamental truth. Individuals were expendable, but the species was not. Marta had been taught this since childhood. She had believed it. She had internalized it so deeply that it had become part of her skeleton. But now, standing in the empty depot, staring at the numbers that did not add up, she found herself asking a question she had never asked before. If everyone is expendable, then what is being preserved? On day 53, the order came down from planetary command. It was brief, efficient, unemotional. All non-essential personnel are to be consolidated to primary defensive positions. Secondary Khazars will be abandoned in an orderly fashion. Civilians will be processed for evacuation per available transport capacity. Marta read it 3 times, per available transport capacity. Marta read it 3 times, per available transport capacity. She knew what that meant. There were 12 million people on Cadia. There were perhaps 300 transport ships left in orbit, and most of those were military vessels designed for troop deployment, not mass evacuation. Even if every ship was loaded beyond capacity, even if they made multiple runs, even if everything went perfectly, they could evacuate maybe 2 million. Maybe. The rest would be left behind. Khazar Partox received its evacuation allocation 2 days later. A data packet transmitted from the orbital command station. Marta opened it, read it, closed it, opened it again to make sure she had not misread. 800 people out of 12,000. The command staff began the selection process immediately. Priority 1, critical military personnel, officers, specialists, anyone with skills that could be transferred to other theaters. Priority 2, Mechanicus adepts, irreplaceable technical knowledge. Priority 3, ecclesiarchy clergy, faith was a strategic resource. Priority 4, essential support staff, logistics officers, medical personnel, anyone who kept the machine running. Marta was priority 4. She was assigned a berth on a transport scheduled to depart in 72 hours. Embarkation point, orbital platform Khazar 7. Transport designation, Munitorum bulk hauler enduring service. She stared at the notification on her data slate. Her name, her personnel number, her embarkation time. Around her, the logistics office was silent. Korn sat at his desk, staring at his own slate. He was not on the list. He was 64 years old. He had served the Munitorum for 46 years. He had coordinated supply lines through 3 Black Crusades. He had dedicated his entire life to the Imperium. He was not essential. "Congratulations," he said quietly. Marta did not respond. She could not, because she had just realized something terrible. The selection criteria made sense. Perfect sense. You saved the people who could contribute to the war effort elsewhere. You saved the young, the skilled, the useful. You did not save the old, the injured, the exhausted. You did not save people based on their past service. You saved them based on their future utility. This was not cruel. This was optimal. And that was what made it unbearable. That night, Marta walked through the Khazar, through the barracks where soldiers sat in silence, cleaning weapons they would never fire again, through the Medicae wing, where the injured lay in rows, waiting for care that would never come, through the depot sublevel, where the empty storage cages cast long shadows in the dim light. She passed a chapel. Inside, a preacher was leading prayers. Hundreds of people had crowded into the space, kneeling on the cold stone floor, reciting the litany of sacrifice. The Emperor protects, but he also demands, and we give willingly, for in our death, humanity endures. Marta stood in the doorway and listened. The words were beautiful, comforting. They promised meaning, purpose, a place in the eternal calculus of the Imperium's survival. But they were also a lie, not intentionally, not maliciously, but a lie nonetheless, because the Imperium would not remember the people who died here. It would not honor them individually. It would not record their names in any great ledger of martyrs. They would simply cease to exist, and the war would continue, and 1,000 years from now, no one would know that Khazar Partox had ever stood. That was the truth. The Imperium did not remember its martyrs. It remembered its victories, its defeats, its statistics. But the individuals who made those statistics possible? They were ash. They were numbers. They were resource expenditure. And Marta Sen, logistical liaison officer, 3rd grade, understood this completely. She walked back to her quarters. She sat at her small desk, and she made a decision. She accessed her personnel file, found her evacuation assignment, and deleted it. It was surprisingly easy. A few keystrokes, a single confirmation, done. The system flagged the change immediately, requested authorization, she provided her credentials, the system accepted them. Her berth was marked as available for reassignment. Someone else could have it, someone younger, someone with more years ahead of them, someone who still believed the system worked. She did not tell anyone. She simply saved the changes, logged out, and continued operations. The transport ships began launching on day 56. Marta watched them from the Khazar's eastern rampart, distant streaks of light against the bruised sky. 800 people, lifted away, carried to orbit. To safety, to survival. She felt nothing, not relief, not grief, not envy, just emptiness. Below her, the Khazar continued to function. Soldiers manned the walls, tech priests maintained the weapon systems, preachers led prayers. The system had not stopped. It would not stop until the very end, because that was what the Imperium demanded. And Cadia did not question the Imperium. On day 60, the enemy finally arrived, not in force, not yet, but scouts, traitor marines, cultists, probing the defenses, testing the response times, looking for weak points. The Khazar's guns roared to life. Last fire lit up the darkness. Shells exploded against the walls. Blood stained the stone. And Marta continued operations. She sat at her terminal, processing requests that no longer mattered, filing reports that no one would ever read. Around her, the logistics office was empty. Everyone else had been reassigned to combat duties. Even Corrin had been given a lasgun and sent to the walls. She was alone, but she worked, because that was all she knew how to do. On day 63, the power failed. The Khazar's main reactor had been damaged in the bombardment. Emergency generators kicked in, but they were not designed to run indefinitely. Lighting flickered, heating systems shut down, cogitator terminals went dark. Marta's terminal died mid-sentence. She sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of battle, the dull thunder of artillery, the sharp crack of last fire, the screams. Then she stood, gathered a pen and a piece of flimsy, and began writing by hand. Khazar Partok's final status report. Day 63 post-invasion. Personnel 11,200 remaining. Casualties 800. Evacuation 800. Status holding. Supplies exhausted. Reserves none. Resupply not expected. Enemy contact continuous. Defensive integrity compromised. Estimated time to breach 72 hours. Recommendation none. System has performed within acceptable parameters. Awaiting further instructions. She signed it, folded it, placed it in her desk drawer. No one would ever read it, but she had filed it anyway, because that was the system, and the system required it. On day 68, Marta Sen stood on the ramparts and watched the sky burn. The void battle above Cadia had reached its crescendo. She could see the flashes now, brilliant bursts of light as ships tore each other apart. The debris field had grown so dense that pieces were beginning to fall through the atmosphere. Molten chunks of metal the size of buildings trailing fire, impacting the surface kilometers away. The horizon glowed red. Behind her, the Khazar was dying. The walls had been breached in 3 places. Hand-to-hand fighting raged in the lower levels. The screaming had stopped hours ago. Not because the fighting had stopped, but because there was no one left to scream. The command staff had issued a final order. All remaining personnel were to fall back to the central keep and hold until relieved. But there would be no relief. Marta knew that. Everyone knew that. They fought anyway, not because they believed they could win, but because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative was surrender, and Cadians did not surrender. She walked through the halls one last time, past the barracks where the walls were pocked with bolter fire, past the Medicae wing where the injured had been given lasguns and told to hold the doors, past the chapel where the preacher was still leading prayers, even as the ceiling collapsed around him. She found Corrin in the logistics office. He was sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. His uniform was torn. His hands were covered in blood. Not his own. He had been fighting. Everyone had been fighting. He had killed 3 cultists with a combat knife. He had held a corridor for 2 hours while wounded soldiers evacuated behind him. And then he had come back here, to his office, to his desk, because this was where he belonged. "They're through the 3rd gate," he said quietly. Marta nodded. "We held for 68 days, he continued, longer than anyone expected. Yes, we did everything right." Marta looked at him, at the old man who had spent his entire life serving the Munitorum, who had believed, truly believed, that the system would protect them, that if they did their jobs, if they followed the protocols, if they remained faithful, the Imperium would not abandon them. "We did everything right," she agreed. Corrin looked up at her. His eyes were red. Not from tears, from exhaustion, from the smoke, from 68 days of watching everything he believed in crumble. "Then why?" He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "Then why didn't it matter?" Marta pulled up a chair and sat beside him, and for the first time in 68 days, She said the thing she had been thinking since the very beginning. Because the system was never designed to save us. Corrin stared at her. It was designed to use us, she continued. To burn us slowly. To extract every ounce of labor, every ounce of faith, every ounce of life and convert it into time. Just a little more time. For someone else, somewhere else. Corrin's voice cracked. That's heresy. No, Marta said gently. It's doctrine. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the burning sky. Cadia was never meant to win. It was meant to hold, for as long as possible, at any cost. And we did. For 10,000 years we held. And when we couldn't hold anymore, the system simply moved on. Because that's what it does. It doesn't mourn. It doesn't remember. It just continues. She turned back to him. We did everything right, Corrin. We followed every protocol. We kept the faith. We served without question. And it didn't matter. Because the system doesn't care if you do everything right. It only cares that you keep functioning until you can't anymore. Corrin closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. His breathing was slow, labored. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear. What do we do now? Marta smiled, a small, sad smile. We continue operations. The keep fell on day 70, not in a glorious last stand, not in a defiant blaze of martyrdom. It fell the way a body falls when the heart finally stops. Quietly, inevitably. The defenders had run out of ammunition hours before. They fought with bayonets, with combat knives, with pieces of rubble, and when those broke, they fought with their hands. And when they could no longer fight, they died. Marta did not fight. She sat at her desk in the logistics office, surrounded by the sounds of battle, and she wrote. She wrote everything she had seen, everything she had learned, not as a report, not as an official record, but as a testimony. A single, honest account of how a world died. She wrote about the supply chains that collapsed, about the requisitions that were denied, about the psychers who burned out, about the soldiers who went hungry, about the system that kept grinding forward, even as the people who sustained it crumbled to dust. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the pen ran out of ink. Then she found another pen and continued. She wrote until the sounds of battle reached the logistics level. Then she placed her pen down, folded the pages carefully, sealed them in a watertight case, and placed them in the bottom drawer of her desk. No one would ever read them, but she had written them anyway, because someone had to remember. The door to the office exploded inward. Marta stood, straightened her uniform, clasped her hands behind her back. A Chaos Space Marine stepped through the smoke. His armor was the color of dried blood. His helmet bore the 8-pointed star. Trophies hung from his belt, skulls, flayed skin, things Marta could not identify. He moved with the casual confidence of something that had killed 1,000 times and would kill 1,000 more. He looked at her. This small, thin woman in a Munitorum uniform. This unarmed logistical officer who had stayed at her post until the very end. He raised his bolter, and Marta Sen, who had never asked for recognition, who had never sought glory, who had spent her entire life moving supplies from one place to another in service of a system that never once acknowledged her existence. She did not flinch. She met his gaze. And in that moment, she understood something. The Imperium had not failed her. It had never promised to save her in the first place. The bolter fired. Cadia broke 8 days later. Not the planet itself. The planet had been lost for weeks. But the idea of Cadia, the promise, the unbreakable fortress, the immovable anchor. Abaddon the Despoiler brought the Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity into low orbit and fired its main weapon directly into Cadia's crust. The tectonic plates shattered, the surface cracked open like an egg, and the planet that had stood for 10,000 years, that had endured 13 Black Crusades, that had bled and suffered and sacrificed more than any other world in the Imperium, it died. Not with a scream, with a sigh. The few surviving defenders, those still clinging to the remnants of the orbital stations, watched it happen through viewports and scanner feeds. They watched the continents split, the oceans boil away, the atmosphere tear apart in sheets of fire, and then there was nothing, just debris, just dust, just the memory of a world that had believed, truly believed, that faith and duty would be enough. The survivors evacuated, those who could, scattered across the Imperium to fight on other fronts, to die on other worlds. They carried the cry with them, Cadia stands, but it was a A beautiful lie, a necessary lie, but a lie nonetheless. Cadia did not stand, Cadia fell, and the Imperium continued without it. 3 years later, a salvage crew arrived in the Cadian system. They were Munitorum contractors, assigned to recover material from the debris field. Useful scrap, intact weapons, anything that could be repurposed. The Imperium did not waste resources, even in defeat, especially in defeat. The system was quiet now, empty. The war had moved on. The Chaos fleets had pushed deeper into Imperial space. New defensive lines had been established. New fortress worlds had been designated. The machine continued. The salvage crew spent weeks sifting through the wreckage, cataloging, processing, shipping crates of salvage back to Forge worlds where it would be melted down and reformed into new weapons for new wars. On the 73rd day of operations, a junior salvager found something unusual, a section of intact structure, part of a fortress city, shielded by chance from the worst of the destruction. Atmosphere gone, of course. Everyone inside long dead. But the architecture was intact, recognizable. The designation still visible on a cracked wall, Kasser Partox. Out of curiosity, the salvager explored. He found frozen bodies in the corridors, soldiers still at their posts, tech priests still clutching their tools, preachers still kneeling in prayer, all of them perfectly preserved by the vacuum, their final moments captured in ice. And in a small office on the 3rd sublevel, he found a desk. And in the desk's bottom drawer, sealed in a watertight case, he found a stack of handwritten pages. He read the first line, Kasser Partox's final status report, day 63 post-invasion. He read the whole thing, every page, every word, the careful, precise handwriting, the detailed accounting of how a fortress died, not from enemy action, but from abandonment. From the slow starvation of a supply chain that had simply stopped. And when he finished, he sat there in the frozen darkness for a long time. Then he placed the pages back in the case, sealed it, and filed it with the salvage inventory. Item, personal effects, non-essential, no strategic value. The case was loaded onto a transport, shipped to a Munitorum depot on a Forge world 3 sectors away, stored in a warehouse with 10 million other crates of salvage. It remained there for 200 years. No one ever opened it. No one ever read it. And eventually, when the warehouse was decommissioned and its contents liquidated, the case was destroyed, its contents incinerated, converted to ash, and the ash was swept into the intake vents of a forge furnace to be repurposed. The Imperium does not remember its martyrs. It cannot. There are too many. Billions die every day in service to humanity's survival. To remember them all would require more administratum clerks than there are stars in the galaxy. So the Imperium remembers systems. It remembers that Cadia held for 10,000 years. It does not remember the 40 billion people who died to make that possible. It does not remember Marta Seni, who worked until her terminal went dark. It does not remember Corin, who believed in the system until the very end. It does not remember the soldiers who fought with empty stomachs and broken weapons. It does not remember the children who never grew old enough to understand why they were born into war. The Imperium remembers that Cadia fell, and it built new fortresses to replace it. And the system continued. Because the system always continues. That is what it was designed to do. Not to save, not to remember, not to value the individuals who sustain it, but to endure, to burn lives like fuel, to extract faith like ore, to grind bones into powder and call it progress. And the terrible, beautiful, unforgivable truth is this: it works. The Imperium survives. Humanity endures. 10,000 years after the Emperor was entombed, his empire still spans the galaxy, not because it is just, not because it is kind, but because it is efficient at converting human suffering into continued existence. Cadia fell, but the gate still stands. New regiments hold the line now. New fortresses anchor the defense. New worlds bleed in the Emperor's name, Dia's filtration material. And in 1,000 years, they too will fall, and the Imperium will build new ones to replace them, and the system will continue, and no one will ask why, because asking why is inefficient, and efficiency is holy. In the wreckage of Kasser Partox, in the frozen chapel where the ceiling had collapsed, there is a wall. And on that wall, scratched into the stone with a combat knife, are words. No one knows who wrote them. The hand that carved them turned to ice centuries ago. The name is lost, the face is forgotten, but the words remain. The Emperor protects, but he does not save. and we knew this. And we served anyway. Not because we believed we would survive, but because someone had to stand, someone had to hold, someone had to burn, so that others might live a little longer, so that humanity might endure a little further, so that the light might last one more day. We were the fuel. We were always the fuel. And when we burned out, the Imperium simply lit the next candle. And we knew this, and we served anyway, for the Emperor, for humanity, for nothing, for everything. Cadia stands. The salvage crews never found the chapel. The debris field was too vast, too chaotic. They took what they could carry and moved on. And eventually, the wreckage of Khazar Pardox drifted into Cadia's sun and burned away. The words on the wall turned to vapor. The prayer dissolved into light. And the system continued, as it always had, as it always would, until the stars themselves grew cold. And even then, the Imperium would find a way to burn them. Status: Khazar Pardox deleted from Imperial records. Casualties: 11,200 personnel. Acceptable loss. Strategic value: minimal. Recommendation: none. File closed. Continue operations.